Welcome back. Today we are talking with Regina Phelps for her 50th appearance here. Regina, lots of what's the word you use? Bleak information there in segment one about the World Economic Forum risk report. Why don't we finish off? Because I know there's a couple of things you still wanted to talk about there before we
I
move on.
do. I do. The last thing I want to mention about the World Economic Forum is they always give a short and a long-term global outlook. So, and again, using those five categories we talked about earlier, the stormy all the way through calm. And then as they've done all of their, bringing together all of that data, what they do is they do their forecast. And that's is what this really is. And so the first thing I want you to look at is I'd like you to look at the top horizontal bar where it says short term and notice the colors. And then notice the actual names that are below those and sort of stop for a second and take a look at that. Now, I want you to then let your eyes go immediately as far red as you can along the colors. And I want you to notice the little teeny tiny yellow section at the very end. Yeah, right.
Is it really there?
Yeah. So in the short-term category, which means in the next 2 years, literally 1% of the participants believed that things would be calm. Now, if you were to look at last year, 10% of the people thought it would be calm. So, and then if you pull back and look at it across again, look at the colors, 5% think it's going to be stormy. This used to be like 2 or 3%. All of the numbers that are the severe ones, both stormy and turbulent, have increased substantially from last year and a huge amount from 2 years ago. And so this gives you an idea, and this is why they call the report bleak, is that there is not a lot of confidence that things are going to be returning to some sort of more blissful state globally in the foreseeable future, and that includes 10 years. And you'll notice that there is no yellow in the long term. There's no calm in the long term. So that kind of gives you, kind of a big picture kind of idea about how people are feeling. So I always then like to ask people, if you were to evaluate the world as you think of it, and you looked at those 5 options, where would you think where would you place yourself?
Well, knowing the industry I'm in and, having good conversations with you sometimes.
Yes.
I think I would have to be within turbulent and stormy, at least in between them somewhere, knowing what I know and what I'm experiencing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm exactly with you. I could have my foot in each one of them, sort of stormy and turbulent. But I do think that the risks are really high and more than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I can't quite imagine what's going to make it get better in the shorter term, I guess. So on that note, yeah, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about the United States. And I'm really talking about what I call wild cards. There are a variety of things going on here, of course, in the US that are really concerning. And I want to start, first of all, of course, with bird flu. You and I are, old friends on pandemics, and we've talked about bird flu a lot, and we've talked about H5N1 before. And I just want to give our listeners just a little bit of background data, because they may not understand or know this. H5N1 didn't just appear recently. It actually started in 1996. And this is why I got interested in pandemic planning, was when this actually began in southern China in 1996. It only infected maybe, I think it was like 20 adults, but there was a 50% fatality rate, 50. And so, but then all of a sudden it disappeared. And so people were freaked out around the world about this, but then it kind of just disappeared. And this has actually happened in a very similar way until quite recently. So since 1997, there are 23 countries that have had H5N1, and the fatality rate was still around 50%. And it resulted in people dying of severe pneumonia and death, literally, in those known cases. So very high fatality rate, but then it would just disappear. It would appear and then be gone. Sometimes it'd be months, sometimes it'd be 6 or 8 months. But the H5N1 that we're having now in the United States, this is the longest it's existed, and there's also been only 2 deaths. Actually, only 1 death, sorry. I get my measles deaths
Mm.
mixed up with my H5N1 deaths. So historically, WHO's only reported 971 cases before we had this big outbreak here in the United States, and that basically had 467 deaths. Now, what's driving the current H5N1 outbreak, which really started at the end of 2023, it's a primarily influenza that's hosted in wild birds primarily, but this time it's infected a host of other people. So it's infected poultry. In the United States, there is large poultry farms. It's affected cows, which was a big surprise because no one believed that there were receptors in cow udders for avian influenza until this go around. And then cats have been dying from it because they eat birds, wild birds, or they're being fed dead chickens that were infected. And of course, there's an opportunity for infections with humans, both with poultry and cows primarily, has been their major source. So this has become a huge problem. And in my state, California, we have the largest dairy herds in the United States. So this has become, it's pervasive, it's everywhere. It's in almost every county in California. We have dairy farming almost everywhere, except for really the big cities and the hot deserts. We have lots and lots of dairy farms. And so this is becoming increasingly a big problem. Let me just say one thing before I move on. My concern about this is that we are doing a lousy job of trying to get our arms around this. And with the coming cuts in the CDC, NIH, HHS, Health and Human Services, I am deeply concerned about how the ball might get dropped on avian flu research, anything about updating vaccines, and is anybody really paying attention sufficiently about this at the federal level? And I am unsure and deeply concerned about that.
Yeah, I don't think it is getting the attention. Not
Right.
after what was in the headlines today as we were
Yeah.
recording, the cuts to HHS.
Yes. When I
So
saw
I
that, I
don't think
just,
this is being thought of at all.
right, right. This is really not the time to cut back your biggest health service and research arm. And they did initially fire everybody that was part of the H5N1 task force at HHS. That was a couple of weeks ago. They then tried to reinstate them. I don't know if that was successful, and I don't know who is in the current culling of the 10,000 that they're actually getting rid of. But I am really concerned. And you know what I think about every time I think about this, Alex, is you remember when when COVID first came out, it originally started to circulate in November. The first real cases popped up in December. And then, of course, in January, it was, in 2020, it was moving.
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of criticism about China, about not being able to contain this, not be able to control this. What are you doing? You're allowing this thing to promulgate and to then pass along gets to people. And next thing you know, there's a pandemic. And what do you think they're going to say about the United States when we've had this going on for 18 months? And now we're actually even impacting our ability to contain it even more than we had been before. What would you say about us?
I'm not sure I can say that out loud on the recording, but it would be
Mm,
hypocritical to the highest degree. It really would.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about this often because people are still going, oh, remember what China did about COVID? I think like, are you paying any attention to the H5N1 virus? Now, if
Yeah.
this doesn't become a pandemic, we're just darn lucky, Alex. And I pray that it doesn't, because can you imagine the societal polarization globally? And if we had another pandemic, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine how that would happen.
Yeah. And not learning from history. So you're
Right.
going to repeat it.
Yeah.
And that could be what happens here.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that, man. Which gets to us another thing that's going on. It's not just, by the way, in the United States. I've been following Canada's measles outbreaks too, and you've had quite a few of them, but they're also all over the world because there's a large anti-vax movement that's been stopping kids from getting vaccinated, their parents making that decision. So you look at this little kid who's probably about, 5 months old, covered in measles. Now, measles may be, yes, a rash and people are miserable for a while, but it has very significant health implications that can be a lifetime and it can kill kids. So, and this is the part that just amazes me. Measles was actually declared eliminated in the United States in the year 2000. We were so effective in vaccines and in vaccinating kids, we had no measles. There was maybe a couple cases a year, but they were actually people that came from outside the US, weren't vaccinated, and actually came in and they were infected as they got here, meaning they were already infected when they arrived. So, I mean, we have had zero measles until very, very recently, and it's been really escalating over the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years. This year is the biggest outbreak ever. This is actually from a couple of days ago. They only issue the statistics on the measles outbreaks every 3 or 4 days. They do it on Tuesday and they do it on Saturday. So measles actually both in Texas and New Mexico, this is where this big outbreak has occurred. There were 378 cases. 40 people were hospitalized. Those were all children, some of them on ventilators. When kids are hospitalized, there's a couple things that go on. One can be a really severe pneumonia because kids have little tiny lungs, right? And and when they get really all puffed up with all of that infection, they get really, really sick and it's hard for them to breathe. Also, it causes encephalitis, which is swelling of the brain. And there can be lots of disabilities from kids with encephalitis. And then there's another thing that can happen to anybody with measles. And this is actually very creepy, is you can have something that's called immunological amnesia, which means you get measles. And what it does is it takes just imagine every disease you've ever had that's infectious. And imagine that you've got like a chalkboard in your immune system. And it's got the list of all the things that you've either been vaccinated for or you have been infected by. And what happens with measles, it has this weird ability to basically take up an eraser and take everything off the board. So you actually have no protection against anything except measles, which is wild. So all your vaccines are gone.
Wow.
Most of the people that are actually being infected are unvaccinated. Some of them had one dose, but it wasn't sure whether they had one dose after they were infected or after they were exposed. And most are kids between 5 and 17. And there was one child who died who was a young child, unvaccinated. And it was our first death of a child in a decade. There was one adult who died in New Mexico. So this is an ongoing outbreak. It's also in many other states, but this is the big one. I mean, there's like if you go to the CDC site, you'll see about 25 states that have measles in it. But it's like 2 cases here and maybe like another one over here. So they're random. But this one is actually a huge mess of just lots of unvaccinated people. Somebody came into the environment with measles and it just took off. And again, I would encourage anybody to there's a great website that I would encourage anybody to go to. It's called Med, M-E-D, Mail, MAIL.org, promedmail.org. It's actually the website. It's an odd name, I know, but it's the website for the Infectious Disease Society of the United States. It's hosted by Harvard, and you can go there and you can find out all kinds of really interesting outbreaks that are happening, not just in the US, but worldwide. And you can sign up for email blasts, which I get one every day that talks about all the different diseases that are happening globally. If you want to not sleep at night, you might want to think about that, Alex.
Just as an FYI, the last time I even heard about measles, I was still in grade school.
Oh my God. Wow. That was like last 10 years ago, right?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's shocking to me. It's just shocking to me that all of a sudden this is okay. I don't know what to say about it, but it makes me crazy. It's the nurse part of me, right? Can't help. Oh, but then oh my God. We also have the largest tuberculosis outbreak ever in the history of the United States going on right now. Right now, today. And of all places, Kansas. No one knows why this started. That's the other part that's really weird. They think that probably somebody in the environment had might have had history of tuberculosis, and there's a medication that you have to take forever, and they stopped taking it, and their tuberculosis returned. That's the only because there's no there's no documented case of it anywhere. And so this has started in January of 2024, and it's huge given the fact that, when was the last time you heard of, the Black Death, right? Tuberculosis. It's the #1 killer worldwide, by the way, tuberculosis, still to this day, but you don't find it in the US. To date, there's 147 people in Kansas that have been diagnosed with TB. 67 of them have been actually known ill, and 80 of them actually are what are called latent infections, which means they have tuberculosis, but they have no symptoms. And they're actually even more dangerous because you can be around them and they're not expressing any symptoms, but yet they're transmitting the disease.
Didn't we get rid of, like measles, get rid of TB a long time ago as well?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, this one really blows me away. I mean, this feels like I'm talking about, 100 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And there was many different antibiotics that were traditionally used. Then it became basically resistant to all of them. Now there's one drug that's used worldwide for tuberculosis. And I hope they're thinking of finding other ones because there's really only one that's the main treatment currently. Oh my gosh. So then we just mentioned this briefly, but I just want to say that the HHS impacts, changes that are happening could have a huge impact, of course, on public health. RFK Jr. is the new HHS secretary. The thing that's been shocking to me about this measles outbreak in the US is that RFK Jr. has been completely silent on recommending vaccines. Now, he's not a physician, he's not a medical professional, he's an attorney, he's an environmental lawyer. But usually the person in charge of HHS is immediately telling people to go out and get vaccinated if they're not vaccinated. He has been completely silent. He actually recommends that people take cod liver oil and vitamin A to treat measles. Really. Now,
is that like something from the 1800s?
Probably the cod liver oil is, I bet. There's been no studies that I have been able to find, and I have looked, about cod liver oil and measles. However, vitamin A, there are studies in places like Sudan, Ethiopia, in places where they've had severe and rampant famine, where kids get measles and they are already pretty emaciated and very bad shape. They give them big doses of vitamin A because it will help them. But we're talking about a kid that's, 50% below their ideal body weight and is starving to death, not somebody who's, an American or Canadian or somebody like that, an average person with a, okay diet. So those treatments are not going to help you. Is the bottom line. The other thing that he's done is he canceled, there's something called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, which actually reviews all vaccines. They make recommendations for the annual flu shot in the United States, which is also usually the same one that you guys then get in Canada. And they also provide vaccines for if you're going to another country or things like that. So there's a big vaccine oversight. And they've actually postponed their meetings, and they would have normally had one already to pick the flu vaccine for the fall, and they have not yet been formally reactivated. That's a little concerning for me. It takes on an average of 8 months to make a flu vaccine because they're made the old way, where they actually grow things in eggs, and it takes a long time to make them. And eggs are, as you probably have already heard, are kind of in short supply in America. So, so that's going to be a problem. And then, so there are new numbers, of course, now it's 10,000. When I did these slides a couple of days ago, there were only 5,600 people being laid off, and now it's up to 10,000. They did lay off all the H5N1 researchers, and then they realized that maybe that wasn't a good idea, and they've been trying to get them back, but I don't know if they've been lucky about that or not.
Yeah. Seems to me one of the underlying issues there is HHS and some of those other groups, instead of putting the health of people first, they're putting the health of other things first when they're in place to help people first.
Right. I mean, that's what this whole agency is for.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's deeply disturbing to me. And again, my background's in nursing, so I, in particular, am really offended by this because I think the health of our population is the most important thing. And yeah. Okay, I won't get on that soapbox.
Yeah.
Then I have a tiny, tiny bit of good news, and that is here in the United States, and I wonder if they have this in Canada. You might want to do a Google on this. If you have we have the American Society of Civil Engineers, and you might have a Canadian Society of Civil Engineers too. I imagine because it's a global organization. But they actually every year, and they've been doing this for maybe 30 years, they issue a report card on the infrastructure in the United States. And they grade us. And we actually have been doing horribly. I mean, for many years, we were a D minus overall in infrastructure. Then we got to be a C minus. And oh my God, we got to a C. And we're excited. Isn't that terrible? But it's true. So this year, when the report was issued, which was, by the way, Wednesday of this week, I was up reading it before I gave my speech at DRJ. Oh gosh, save me. And they attribute the fact that the reason that we actually got an improvement in our infrastructure is because of the Infrastructure Act that was passed over the last 4 years under Biden that actually funded a lot of these projects that had been sitting, with no money. And so the good news is we are getting better. We have a long way to go. And I provide some idea about what an A, B, C, and D, E, and F means in the categories as far as ASCE is concerned. A, of course, is really exceptional. B is good. C is, that's what we are right now. We're mediocre. I don't know. When you went to school, did you want to be mediocre?
No.
No. Right. Well, we used to be a D minus, which was poor at risk. And then F, of course, we all know what that is, not good at all. So that's what the scale is. But now then this is the overall score, but I want you to count, just look at the number of Ds. There's actually, I think, 9 of them. They look at all of the major infrastructure in the United States. So, aviation like airports, things like dams, like wouldn't you like a good dam? Or things like levees, which hold water, or things like roads and bridges and school buildings, transit systems, stormwater services, blah, 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 blah. And you can see really the best one is actually B, is the ports. That's the best. That's the highest grade we have. And then we have a B minus for rail. So, it's not a stunning report, and you shouldn't be like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing we've ever done, but it's better than it was, is all I want to say. So many of these categories have been actually stuck. I've been reading this report, I don't know, maybe since I found it in maybe 2015. And many of these things have just been woefully ignored and underfunded for years and years and years. And we just ignore our infrastructure, and it has huge ramifications. We have bridges that collapse. We've had dam failures. We've had all kinds of things that have occurred in the United States. And it's simply because we're not taking care of it. And that's not good. And and people might say, well, Regina, why does this impact my business? Oh my gosh, everything on this list impacts your business. If you're in the country, right? Water services, bridges, airport, I mean, all of that. Supply chain issues, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it's really a major issue. So it's a little bit better, but not as certainly where it needs to be, right?
Yeah.
There's another issue in the United States, and I'm curious. I'm curious if this is happening in your country as well. But in the United States, homeowner insurance is becoming increasingly difficult, and in some places, completely unavailable. Why is that? And it's all driven by climate change, and it's driven by wildfires in particular, but also tornadoes, and also things like flooding. So if you look at this map, what this is there was a study done. There's a group called the First Foundation that actually does quite a few studies related to environmental issues. And they started to look at this homeowner insurance crisis, and they started to wonder, I wonder if people have stopped paying their homeowners insurance, which is very dangerous, of course, because you have an event and nobody's going to help you, right? FEMA does not provide huge funding to replace your house. The red dots are all the places in the United States where people are actually not paying their insurance, and their insurance is being canceled.
That's
Look
a
at
lot.
those. That's a lot. And if you look at that, look at the parts of the United States that are red. Oh, by the way, Texas didn't report any data. And there are parts of Florida that did not report any data. So that's why you see these big white pieces there, like all of Texas and then chunks of Florida. In Nevada and Utah, there's just places where nobody is because it's desert. But essentially, this means that if a storm goes through, people don't have insurance, what are they going to do? So then do you have somebody living in a shack or posting a tent or, I mean, I don't know. But here in the United States, insurance is becoming incredibly expensive. And mine has gone up and I don't even have earthquake insurance because I live in an area where you have to pay an additional like, $10,000 a year for earthquake insurance. My insurance has gone up 4 times in the last 5 years.
Wow.
And it's like 25% every time.
Oh,
Yeah,
geez.
it's shocking. So again, people are basically giving up on paying their premiums, but that means if something happens, you're in real trouble. I've had clients of mine that are in Tornado Alley, which is in Kansas, sort of the Oklahoma, Tennessee, blah, blah, blah. I've had one client who actually has had his roof replaced 3 times in the last 2 years because of tornado and storm hail damage. So that gives you an idea about insurance companies going like, I'm replacing your roof again.
Yeah.
So these are again there are 150 zip codes where this is looking at essentially where insurers find that at least 10% of the homes have no insurance. And so in many cases also, as I just mentioned, insurance companies are refusing to offer coverage at all because of the impacts of the environment. Is that happening at all in Canada?
Honestly, I've not heard that here.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean it's not occurring, but I've not heard it. And, I've mentioned this before. We have all these conversations in the dog park when I take the dog over, and this has never cropped up.
Hmm.
I have not seen it in the headlines, but I don't want to say that it's not occurring, but
Mhm.
maybe it's not occurring to the extent that it's happening, according to this map here in the US.
Yeah. Next time you're at the dog park, ask about homeowners insurance. Saying you were talking to this weird woman in California,
Yeah.
and she says that it's a problem in the US. See what they say.
I will, because as soon as we finish recording, that's where
You're going to the dog park. I figured.
I
Right. That's great. And then, of course, the last thing I'm going to mention in this kind of report card issue is in the United States is the U.S. government instability. And that really is the impact of Doge in particular, and creating widespread layoffs, terminations, program closures. And it's creating chaos at so many levels, which is also then impacting universities, impacting obviously state governments, local governments. So the cascading effect is gigantic. And I guess, I've owned a business for over 40 years, and it's hard for me to imagine that people that don't know your business would come in and within 2 or 3 days, they would determine what programs are good, what are bad, and start to lay off people in mass numbers. So I don't quite understand the logic behind it. And I find it just kind of horrifying, to be honest with you. I don't feel it's a thoughtful execution of trying to reduce the government size. I'm sure there's probably ways some places, of course,
Yeah,
but not where you could just have that kind of rampant house cleaning, and then just seeing what happens when those things are closed or
yeah.
reduced in size. I was talking to somebody from NOAA a couple days ago, and they were talking about how that over 50% of all the tornado and hurricane forecasters have all been terminated. I thought, that's great.
Well, that's
I mean,
good considering extreme weather events are on the increase. The
right,
impacts are on the
right,
increase. People aren't paying their insurance premiums because they're not
right,
can't afford them because of so many storms, and insurance
right.
companies won't insure these people, like you just said. And so let's get rid of the people who protect that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. It's mind blowing to me. And I think the other thing is that we've seen that in places that I've been and where I have friends, or even around here, where there's been a much more reduced radar coverage for weather. And then the release of weather balloons, which is actually one of the major ways that they determine weather and then determine tracking of trends. Those have been substantially reduced, but in the West Coast and in some places stopped altogether. So that means that all the research they've been doing about weather and weather forecasting based on trends, et cetera, is all stopped. Um, and so that seems to be insane to me. And what I've also seen, and this is also related to other things they're trying to do, which is shut down FEMA, is that the articles I've read about that in a variety of sources have said that they're looking to lean on private contractors to basically make up the difference. So I thought if you're just trying to save money, does it make sense that you would hire a private contractor who, I don't know, I bet would cost more than those government workers?
That's
I don't know. What do
exactly
you
what was just
think?
going through my head right now. It's like, that would cost more.
Yeah, you think? Yeah, yeah. Privatizing, and there's a big part of the plan is to privatize many of these services, but as you and I know, it's more expensive to privatize them than it is to have employees who do them.
Mm.
And then, the data could walk off with those people and not be kept within that institution as well. So I think that's a deep concern of mine as well. So I did mention about the long-term consequences of many of these things. But again, I'm just really concerned about the fact that we're cutting off our nose to spite our face. And little things like this, I just want to end with, layoffs in national parks. There's some national parks that won't open or they'll be very severely restricted, and we know that already. For example, Yosemite, which is a huge famous park, 2.5 hours from where I live, they essentially stopped all reservations for the first 45 days of this year. They were told that they didn't think they'd be able to keep any campground open. So the idea that now that they've opened some, but not all of them. So stop and think about, you have a national park. Where are most national parks? They're in rural places, right? Because I don't know, parks are in rural places, right? But just think about the hotels around them. Think about the restaurants around them. Think about the stores that people go buy tchotchkes in. Think about the impact financially to those rural communities that are in those areas where there are parks. So you don't have the park open. You may say, well, gosh, we saved so much money. Well, you probably did maybe, but
Mm.
what about those communities that aren't going to be making any money because you closed that park or you reduce the services so greatly that most people aren't going?
Yeah.
There's not much thought about that.
An impact to the communities to the point where businesses are now closing. Now you've got more people unemployed.
Yep,
So it just starts having a spiral effect to other areas.
absolutely. Absolutely. So this is my last kind of query for you, and then we'll end for this session, which is, when you look at the increases in the U.S. instability, which do you think is the one is the most significant right now? Bird flu, failing infrastructure, the homeowner insurance crisis, or U.S. government instability?
Well, I'm not in the US. I'm obviously in Canada looking in. So to me, and from what I'm experiencing, it would be the US government instability.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the same spot. It's fascinating. I did this same question at DRJ yesterday when I gave a keynote speech. 80% of the people voted for the US government instability.
That's a telling time, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought
Or
it was
I should say telling theme,
yeah, I thought it was pretty
going on.
telling. So yeah, that's all I got for today.
Well, another happy talk, I guess, eh? We're
Well,
celebrating number 50 with more doom and gloom.
yeah, number 50 was like, yeah, no bunnies and rainbows. I think we should just, maybe just play a cartoon one time. We could have bunnies and rainbow cartoons and then
Yeah,
we could say we did it, right?
yeah, exactly. Regina, once again, it's great chatting with you. And thank you so much for coming back 50 times. And I'm sure there will be more. Well, I know there will be more.
There will be more,
But,
yes.
I,
Well,
I know
thank
when
you
we
again.
started. What's that?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you again, Alex. It's always great to share these things with you, even though we don't have bunnies and rainbows. We do have good laughs in spite of it. Thank
Yeah,
you
we
again.
do. And one of these days, we really will record what we talk about during our breaks because those are they're really fun and interesting. I'm just not sure we could actually publish some of them.
Yeah, that's true, right?
Regina, thank you so much. And everyone watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.